Hi all, this is Allmighty and welcome to this video. So it has been long overdue, the World Chess Championship match of 2010. Yeah, it's been a while since I've made a game from this championship. So the last game I covered was game 10. This is game 11, round 11 of 12 games that should be played. Plus, so currently at the moment after 10 rounds we have a score 5-5. So both of the players have managed to get 2 wins. And the rest has been draws. What happens after round 12 if the result is 6-6? Then they go to tie breaks. But okay, let's see what happened in this game. This time Anand is with white pieces, and once again the Anand who has been a guy who mostly pushed the ideas and everything in this championship match, bringing novelties to the game and everything, once again starts with a surprise to the tournament. All of the games have started with d4 first move, and this game starts with first move c4. So c4 going for the English opening, and Topalov immediately responds with e5, keeping all the options open. Knight to c3, knight to f6, simply developing the knights and entering after 3 moves in the 4 knights game of the 4 knights variation, let's say, of the English. We have g3 and now d5. Pawn captures, knight captures, bishop to g2. And for those of you who play the Sicilian Dragon, this setup should look familiar. So if you look at it from a different point of view, here white is the one who has the dragon setup. So by using this type of moves, this opening is called the English opening, the reverse dragon. So keeping in mind that in this setup white is the one who has the bishop on g2, this very strong bishop who is eyeing on this diagonal. White is actually the one who is got the upper hand, because after all he started first and he has that one tempo more. So instead of going for bishop to e6 here, knight to b6 was played, and this is a standard idea. If you would play bishop to e6, then a simple castles, bishop to e7 and d4. White already enjoys the space in the center, and releasing this light square bishop to be very, very strong. So this is the idea. One of the most important moves to make when you're playing as black in the Sicilian Dragon is definitely d5. White has already played d4 here, and thus far he is considered to be a better side. So not to allow this with bishop to e6, of course nothing is lost and the play is going to be played, but white is better after pushing d4, just for a little bit. Here knight to b6, and we see castles. Bishop to e7, a3, castles, and b4. As it is when black plays the Sicilian, a6 and b5 are pretty standard moves. Here a3 and b4 are pretty standard moves. Bishop to e6, and now d3. So just continuing simply with the development, f6. Some of the moves that the players make in this opening are quite similar to the moves that you would play when playing in Sicilian with the black or with the white pieces. So keep that in mind. Knight to e4, definitely a move that isn't something you would see when black is playing, so putting the knight from c6 to e5, but here we see it. And actually at that time, playing in this World Championship match, it wasn't a move that was played very often, especially after queen to e8 we saw knight to c5, which once again was considered to be a novelty delivered by Anand. Here the knight is coming on c5, and Anand is tempting Topalov to capture with the bishop on c5, thus allowing white to be the only side with a bishop pair. But on the other hand, there will be an awkwardly placed pawn on c5. On the other hand, also when the pawn captures on c5, this b file will be wide open, rook can come simply on b1, and with this bishop on this diagonal, white could create a lot of threats. So this was Anand's idea, this was the novelty, and if you don't capture the bishop, this pawn is a casualty. You can play bishop to c8, but this is a little bit of a passive move, so definitely bishop to c5 is the best move. Pawn captures and knight comes to d5. Bishop to b2. Also possible was bishop to d2, so keeping an eye on this knight not to jump to c3. Rook to d8, and now queen moves from the d file. We have knight back to e7, and we have rook to b1. So going with this plan, attacking on the b file, very very early in the game. And yeah, Topalov needs to find a way how to actually go towards this idea. Probably a4, a5, a4 could be considered with playing bishop to b3, but at this moment this is too slow. So bishop to a2 was played, attacking the rook. Rook comes on c1, and now queen to f7. Having the bishop and the queen on this diagonal, you have bishop to d5 available, bishop to b3, all sorts of things. Bishop to c3, moving the bishop out of the way, opening up the b file once again with the same idea, and we have a rook to d7. Queen comes to b2, rook comes on b8 because the pawn on b7 was attacked, and now the other rook comes on d1. We have bishop back to e6 and rook to d2. A clever little maneuver where white is actually planning to play queen to b1 and rook to b2. On the other hand, he is keeping the c rook on the c1, because if for some reason at any point a b6 or b5 is being played, pawn can capture and this rook is attacking on the c file already. One thing to see here is, after all these moves, white is actually the one who is holding all the ropes in this game, the one who is making threats, and the one with the only threat, because black, it doesn't seem that he has any attacking capabilities here. So even after this move, when he plays h6, it doesn't seem that he has any sort of a plan. Here black probably should have played b6 or b5 to open up the b file and tried attacking on this side. But now after queen to b1 we see knight to d5 and rook to b2. Anand is actually allowing the knight to capture on c3 because after a very, very long line, he will be the one who has, after all, the pawn on b7. So if here in the game b6 was played, because, okay, this is the best move and you have to somehow get rid of the threat of rook and the queen attacking on b7, if the knight would capture on c3, rook simply captures on c3 and b6 isn't available anymore. If pawn captures, here the rook is attacking the knight and you cannot do anything about it. So here you would have to play something like rook to d8, just simply move the rook or something like that, but in the end rook captures on b7, queen captures, rook captures. The knight is attacked, so bishop to d5 defends it. And here knight to d4 is a very big threat of a discovery, so you play knight to d2 for the bishop to attack the other bishop. Knight to d4 still, and bishop to d5. If knight to e2, king to f1 is played and you don't have time to actually capture the rook on c3. To keep that in mind, because bishop captures on f7 with check. So queen captures, rook captures, and now king to f1 defends the pawn. After all this, white is the one with the pawn up, but the game still needs to be played. So this was a possibility. Here after rook to b2, Topalov didn't capture, of course, on c3. He played b6 immediately because now the bishop is in the way, and if pawn captures, like it happened in the game, the rook isn't directly attacking the knight on c6. Pawn captures, and there aren't any good discoveries that would actually benefit white to go for the knight and maybe win a pawn or something. Bishop to e5 is met with knight to e5, so all is well on both sides of the board. So bishop to d2, moving out of the way. Now the rook is attacking the knight, and we have rook to d6 defending it. Doubling up the rooks, and queen to d7. We have h4 picking up space on the king side first, and then a rook comes to d8. Queen to b5, even more pressure on c6, and now knight from d to e7 defending the knight. We have queen to b2 back, because here in this situation you cannot move the knight or something to give even more pressure here on the knight on c6, because simply knight to d4. Attacking the queen, the rook and the pawn, not everything can be defended, so rook capture, queen captures, rook captures, and you cannot defend the rook and the knight at the same time. So here white will be losing, so knight to f3, knight to e1 isn't a possibility. Here queen to b2 has been played, so to move out of this way, and now bishop to d5, putting a bishop on a very nice central square. Bishop to b4 attacking the rook, and here you have to play knight to b4, because if you play rook to e6, simply move the rook. e4 can be played, and now this bishop doesn't have a square to go to. Here knight to b4 was played, pawn captures on b4, and rook to c6. So going for the exchanges, going for more drawish Endgame b5, rook captures and rook captures. Here in this situation, we have some kind of a middle game going towards an endgame where black does have 2 pawns on the queen side, but the a7 pawn is a backwards pawn, so for the moment not a real advantage. What he would have to do is somehow try to attack the b5 pawn, somehow exchange it to maybe have 2 connected passed pawns on the far side from the kings and then go for an advantage. While on the other hand here, so for example after bishop to e6, that was played in the game, white is the one who has to open up the center to create some threats of its own. And Anand does just that. So d4, because at the moment on the queen side he cannot look for anything, everything is very well defended, but if you open up the position, then for example this bishop becomes a very strong piece. You would also like to centralize the knight. Those could be the possibilities, and this is why d4 of course is one of the better moves. Here, of course, black can capture, and for the moment you cannot recapture, but after rook to d2, everything is fine. Knight to f5 does hold on the pawn for a moment, but e4 is a possibility. Capturing en passant is impossible because of rook to d7. So here, knight would have to, for example, go back to even to d6, attacking the pawn, and after rook to d4, once again the knight is pinned, the queen is here, and the material is equal. So that, as a consequence, the position will open up, and Topalov didn't want that, so he played e4 in this position. Knight to d2, 2 attackers to this pawn, and queen captures on d4. Not queen captures, but knight captures on e4. It is pretty much the same thing. Queen captures, rook captures, and now king to f7. The queens are off the board, and once again, the same things. These pawns here, and both of the players still have to play for a win. e3, putting all the pawns on dark squares, always a good idea if you have a light square bishop, and now g5. Pawn captures, and now f4, pawn captures and pawn captures, and in the end, both of the players are slowly but surely going towards the drawish endgame. The time control has been reached. This is move 41, and now also white has 2 pawns against 1 on the king side, but the kings are here, so it will be much more difficult for white to actually create some advantage. We have rook to d4 here, king to f2, and now knight to f5, not allowing the king to come here. So we have bishop to f3 and bishop to d5. Knight to d2 goes for even more exchanges, bishop captures and knight captures, and after this rook to a4, the rook is defending the pawn on a7 this way. g4, and here you can play knight to e7 or knight to d6, it is pretty much the same thing. Topalov played knight to d6, and now the pawn on f4 is attacked. King to g3 defends it, and knight to e4 check. King to h4, and knight goes back to d6. And here it was in this position where Anand actually gave a possibility to Topalov to maybe go for a win, because he played rook to d2, and I'm not sure if he gave up a pawn for something, but okay, after knight to b5, the game continued with f5, and it seems that white has a lot of activity here on this file now, trying to give a check to a king and maybe try to do something on the 7th rank. But here it was quite possible if you wanted to draw. I'm not sure that Anand thought that maybe he could go for a win in this game, but maybe he wanted to do it with rook to d2, knight to b5. Here king to g3, simply repeating the position, and everything is fine. If rook to a3 is played, for example, attacking simply the knight, you can play g5, and if you play f5, king to g2, and once again, if black attacks this pawn, king will defend it. Pretty much, a drawish game. Either of the sides cannot move forward. So that was a possibility, of course, but we saw rook to d2, and as I've said, knight to b5. The pawn is attacked, f5 is planned, and it is also a good move because it doesn't allow the king to come closer through g6 or e6. And this was the moment where Topalov probably could have gone for something more, but okay. He played rook to e4, of course, after rook to d7 he has rook to e7, and king to h5 was allowed. Maybe rook to f4 could have been a better move because the knight is attacked. doesn't really have a good square to go to, so you have to play king to g3. And after this, you play something like rook to b4 or rook to e4, and now king to h5 needs to, if you want to play that, you need 2 more moves. But after that, a5 and a4 could already be underway, and this is an idea that you want to do. Push the passed pawns, definitely connected passed pawns on the queen side. But we saw rook to e4, king to h5, and now rook to e3, attacking the knight. Knight to h4, knight to g6, also an idea, so disrupting the idea of rook coming to e7. We saw knight to c3 and rook to d7 check. Rook covers, rook attacks the knight, and knight to e4. Yeah, if black doesn't find a way how to push the pawns, then definitely will be a draw. So here, knight to g6 attacking the rook, and knight to c5. And here, once again, Topalov clearly goes for a draw, because after knight to e7, knight to d3, knight to c8, you will get one of these pawns, and then you can simply sacrifice the knight for the other. g5 is pushed easily, you will exchange here, and this is definitely a draw. But Anand didn't go for it, he decided to move the rook. So he played rook to a3, attacking the pawn here, and rook to d7 simply. The idea is to keep the rook on the 7th rank, and this way there are no checks, and the king cannot come in danger. Rook to e3, king to g7, and g5. So white is progressing, and black should do it as well. So he plays b5, knight comes on f4, and we see b4. There aren't any big threats. If knight to e6, knight can simply capture. So here we saw g6, so picking up even more space on the king's side. b3, and this was actually a moment where a rook to c3 was played, and after this it is a clear draw. Because now you have 2 options. You will either defend with rook to c7 or attack white's knight like it happened in the game with rook to d4. If rook to c7, then you have to be aware of knight to d3, after which, okay, you gotta know that you don't have time, nor can you play b2 because knight simply captures. So on the other hand, you have to defend the knight, and if you move it somewhere else, so if you capture, the rook is falling with a check, then black is even losing the game, so the only move is knight to e6 or knight to a6. And here, after knight to e6, simply rook to b3, and after knight to d4, once again the material is equal. Both of the players do have something. It is a bit more complex situation, which in the end again is a draw. But in the game, finally decided to go for a clear draw. Here rook to d4 was played, and after rook to c5, rook to f4, rook to c7 check. It is quite clear that white is giving checks on c7 or c8. The king has to stay here, otherwise if the king goes out, then the pawn can be pushed and white is winning this game. We had a couple of more moves, so king to g8, rook to b7, attacking the pawn, rook defends it, rook gives a check, king to g7, and it was in this position that they agreed for a draw. So round 11 or game 11 also ended in a draw. Yeah, 5.5 to 5.5, and yeah, one more game to go and in the official matchup, and if it will be a draw, then we are going towards the tie breaks. So it was a very complex game, and a lot of possibilities for both sides. Once again ended in a draw. Once again Anand delivers novelty, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it. That being said, looking forward to round number 12 of this championship, and until then, please enjoy and yeah, play some chess. Until then.